How dogs evolved beside humans. Shocking truth. The ghost in the DNA and historical reality. The year is 2017. A team of geneticists in Germany, staring at a sequencing output, realizes they have been wrong for millennia. The shocking truth they uncovered wasn't just about when the wolf became the dog. It was about how the human became the master. We have always told ourselves a comforting story. We tamed the wild wolf. We took a fearsome predator, coaxed it with scraps, selectively bred the timid ones, and through our superior intellect and kindness, forged the loyal companion, Canis familiaris. It's a heroic tale of human ingenuity, a cornerstone of our self-image as the planet's dominant species. But the evidence is mounting, piece by painstaking piece, from deep Siberian ice cores to dusty Paleolithic pave floors in Europe. The truth is far more unsettling and far more extraordinary. The dog did not evolve for the human. The dog evolved the human. What if the most successful symbiotic relationship in natural history wasn't a choice made by our clever ancestors, but a desperate, codependent survival mechanism forged in the crucible of the Ice Age, where the fate of Homo sapiens hung in the balance? What if the simple act of looking into a dog's eyes, an act we perceive as bonding, is actually the legacy of a profound biological and psychological change that saved us from extinction? This is the shocking historical reality of the dog's evolution, a tale of shared hunger, mutual fear, and a genetic bargain struck 40,000 years ago that redefined both species forever. Part 1. The Cold Convergence. Edge of extinction, 40,000 years ago. The world was a brutal monochrome canvas. Massive glaciers, miles thick, scoured the northern continents. The megafauna, woolly mammoths, cave bears, and giant sloths, roamed a landscape where survival was a daily, deadly calculation. In this epoch, roughly 40,000 years ago, two highly intelligent social predators were struggling for dominance in the frigid Eurasian steppes: anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, and the gray wolf, Canis lupus. They were direct competitors, pursuing the same prey, reindeer, bison, and horse, and utilizing similar hunting tactics. To encounter a wolf pack was often to face a deadly confrontation over a carcass or a shared shelter. Yet this period, the Upper Paleolithic, was also when humans were undergoing a revolutionary cognitive shift. The evidence is etched onto cave walls in Chauvet and Lascaux. Sophisticated art, complex tools, and symbolic thought. We were becoming us. But we were still fragile. Our population was small, and the hunting was treacherous. Simultaneously, the wolves were also under immense environmental pressure. The prey was huge and unpredictable. Hunting alone or in small, inefficient packs meant certain starvation. Natural selection was ruthlessly favoring a specific, minor deviation in the Canis lupus population. Those wolves who were less intensely fearful of the smoky, noisy, and potentially dangerous bipedal creatures huddled around fires. Fire circle and the fringes. Imagine a Paleolithic camp on the edge of a frozen forest. A human band of maybe 20 individuals huddles for warmth. Inside the circle of firelight, there is relative safety and the promise of cooked meat. Outside the light, there is the overwhelming, hungry darkness. For the human hunters, the biggest problem after the kill wasn't the eating, it was the waste. A successful mammoth or bison hunt provided a massive amount of bone, gristle, and intestinal contents that humans could not or chose not to consume. These were simply discarded a safe distance from the camp. For the most desperate, adaptable wolves, this created an irresistible, though high-risk, opportunity. This is the crucial turning point, often romanticized but rooted in stark necessity. Selection for proximity. Wolves who were genetically predisposed to have a lower flight response distance from human activity had access to a sustainable, low-effort food source, our garbage dumps. The boldest, most aggressive wolves were likely killed by human defense. The most fearful starved away from the food. The surviving successful wolves were those who possessed a specific blend of curiosity and caution. Selection for morphology. The wolves who were successful scavengers, focusing on bones and scraps, needed a slightly different skull and jaw structure than the high-impact hunting wolves. The pressure was on for a shorter, broader snout, better equipped for crushing and gnawing, rather than the long, thin snout optimized for the rapid tearing bite required in a pack takedown of live, large prey. This is one of the very first subtle morphological shifts towards the dog. Selection for behavior, the taming of fear. The proximity to humans, generation after generation, had a dramatic, measurable impact on the wolf's genetics. Studies on captive foxes, the famous Siberian fox experiment, a perfect modern analogy, showed that selecting only for tameness, reduced fear response, rapidly produced a startling range of physical changes: floppy ears, spotted coats, curled tails, and most importantly, a smaller brain and shorter muzzle. The wolves who clustered near us weren't good boys. They were the ones whose low fear response allowed them to survive on our trash. And that single trait, a muted fear of humans, unlocked a cascade of physiological changes that literally turned the wolf into a dog, a process scientists call domestication syndrome. The shocking genetic revelation, the amylase factor. The historical narrative hinges on an extraordinary genetic finding, revealed only in the last decade, that directly links the dog's evolution to the human diet. Early dogs, or proto-dogs, living on the fringes of human caps, ate our waste. As Homo sapiens began to rely more heavily on processed foods, specifically starches from tubers, grains, and root vegetables, our trash heap changed dramatically. Our Paleolithic diet was transitioning from almost purely carnivorous to omnivorous. In 2013, a pivotal study comparing the canine genome to the wolf genome dropped a scientific bombshell. Wolves typically carry only 2 copies of the gene responsible for producing amylase, AMY2B, the enzyme needed to digest starch. Modern dogs, however, carry an average of 7 to 30 copies of this same gene. This is the profound coevolutionary truth. The dog could not have successfully coexisted with humans and survived on our refuse unless its genome mutated to effectively digest our carbohydrate-rich diet. The presence of these extra AMY2B genes is a molecular fingerprint of human domestication. The dog did not just adapt to the human presence, it adapted to the human pantry. This genetic adaptation didn't just happen, it was a fierce, relentless evolutionary pressure. Only the wolves with the genetic lottery win, the ability to digest starch, could thrive near our camps and reproduce, successfully outcompeting their carnivorous cousins. The dog's evolution is, in part, a story written in ancient human feces and discarded tubers. The bargain of the hunter. The resource drain and the shifting balance, 30,000 to 20,000 years ago. The relationship between the proto-dog, a creature morphologically distinct from the wolf but not yet the modern dog, and the human tribe was initially one-sided. The wolves benefited from the human trash, while the humans received little tangible gain, perhaps only an early warning system against large nocturnal predators like the cave bear. But the Paleolithic was a world defined by the scarcity of calories. Humans would not indefinitely tolerate a parasite species draining their immediate resources. For the proto-dog to become truly domestic, it had to offer a return on the investment of scraps and space. This transition from tolerated scavenger to indispensable partner occurred in the bitterest depth of the last ice age, the last glacial maximum, around 26,500 to 19,000 years ago. Conditions were maximally harsh, survival demanded peak efficiency, and the proto-dog was about to provide an evolutionary edge that no other tool or innovation could match. The invention of the co-hunt. The human hunter, armed with spears and later the atlat, spear thrower, was formidable, but had critical weaknesses: scent and tracking. Humans have a poor sense of smell compared to almost any mammal. In the vast, shifting snowscapes, tracking wounded or hidden game was incredibly inefficient and ineffective, often leading to lost kills and wasted effort. Endurance and pace. Humans are phenomenal distance runners in heat, persistence hunting, but not necessarily fast over short bursts in freezing, icy terrain. We struggled to drive large, wary herds. Night vision. Our eyesight is severely limited in the low light of the long winter nights. The proto-dog, the increasingly less fearless, smaller-muzzled descendant of the gray wolf, possessed the solutions to all three weaknesses. The integration began not as an act of formal training, but as a coincidental convergence of hunting tactics. Imagine a human hunting party stalking a herd of reindeer. The presence of the proto-dogs, now genetically wired for curiosity rather than immediate flight, would have two effects: flushing the prey. The dogs, following the scents of the human hunters and hoping for scraps, would inevitably move through the brush and snow, inadvertently flushing out hidden game or driving the main herd toward the concealed human archers. Tracking and cornering. When a prey animal was wounded and fled, the human tracking skills were often inadequate. The proto-dog, however, was an expert tracker, capable of following the blood and scent trail silently, leading the hunter directly to the downed animal. This synergy marked the true domestication inflection point. The dog ceased to be a passive scavenger and became an active, mobile tool, an extension of the human sensory system. The humans who hunted with these proto-dogs, even casually, were statistically more successful. They secured more meat, had greater caloric intake, and therefore could sustain larger, healthier tribes. Natural selection now fiercely favored the human groups that tolerated and utilized the dogs. The dog as a calorie multiplier. American archaeologists and anthropologists have spent decades modeling the energetic costs of Paleolithic hunting. The evidence is clear. The dog was an energy-saving device. A 2018 study used archaeological data from sites across Europe and Siberia to demonstrate that dog-assisted hunting could have increased hunting returns by 25 to 35% in certain environments. In the critical, resource-poor years of the LGM, a 25% caloric advantage meant the difference between surviving the winter and tribal extinction. The dog did not just multiply the food supply, it multiplied human migration and adaptability. As humans began to colonize the most extreme environments, such as the high Arctic and eventually the Americas, the dog became the key to mobility. The bridge to the Americas, the first canine pioneer. The most shocking evidence of the dog's importance comes from the colonization of the New World. Around 15,000 to 12,000 years ago, small groups of humans crossed the Bering Land Bridge, Beringia, into North America. The environmental challenge was immense, traversing an unknown icy continent. Genetic and morphological studies show that the very first animals to accompany these pioneer tribes were the dogs. The lineage of the modern Native American dogs and Arctic breeds like the Malamute and Husky traces back directly to these first Beringian dogs. The implication is profound. The journey was so harsh, the resources so scarce, and the risk so high that the humans chose to bring dogs, a dependent species, rather than leaving them behind. This wasn't merely sentiment, it was a cold, pragmatic calculation. The dogs were essential. Sled pullers. While true, complex sled technology may have developed later, early dogs could have pulled smart travois, drag frames, carrying gear, fire-starting materials, or excess meat, freeing up human energy. Guardians, providing a vital defensive perimeter against large predators in the unknown territory. Food cache detectors, using their scent to find previously stored meat hidden under snow or ice. The shocking truth for USA audiences. The first domesticated animal on American soil was not the horse, which came with European settlers 14,000 years later, but the dog. The colonization of the Americas by Homo sapiens was achieved with the direct partnership of the dog. The psychosocial transformation, the oxytocin loop. As the relationship deepened, it triggered an evolutionary response in the human brain that is perhaps the most shocking and enduring piece of this co-evolutionary story. We know that when a human mother gazes at her infant, a surge of the bonding hormone oxytocin, sometimes called the love hormone, is released, cementing the attachment. In 2015, Japanese scientists published a groundbreaking study showing that when a human and a dog gaze into each other's eyes, both species experience a measurable spike in oxytocin levels. The dog's gaze triggers the human oxytocin release. The human's reciprocal gaze and petting triggers the dog's oxytocin release. This means the simple act of looking at your dog is an ancient, hardwired biological feedback loop designed for mutual attachment and survival. This phenomenon is unique to the dog among all domesticated species. It does not occur with the same intensity in cats, horses, or other animals. The proto-dogs that were genetically predisposed to maintain eye contact with humans rather than seeing it as a wolf-like challenge were the ones most likely to be cared for, fed, and protected by humans. Humans, in turn, were biologically rewarded for caring for the dog. The ultimate shock of this historical reality is that dogs didn't just give us a hunting advantage, they fundamentally altered our neurochemistry, making us more cooperative, more empathetic, and biologically bonded to a non-human species. This is the psychological foundation that helped propel Homo sapiens into the complex social beings we are today. The dog taught us, biologically, how to love and cooperate across species lines. This second part has focused on the shift from scavenging to co-hunting, the critical role of the dog in the colonization of the Americas, and the profound psychochemical bonding mechanism, oxytocin. The narrative is building the case for the dog's essential role in human success. The age of artificial selection. The Great Neolithic Divorce, 10,000 years ago. Around 10,000 years ago, a second, equally profound revolution occurred in human history, the Neolithic Revolution. Humans began to transition from nomadic hunter-gatherers to settled farmers, cultivating crops and domesticating livestock, sheep, goats, cattle, pigs, This monumental shift from hunting nature's offerings to controlling them fundamentally changed the relationship with the dog. In the Paleolithic, the dog was a co-hunter, an ally in securing wild prey. In the Neolithic, the dog became a specialized, living tool essential for protecting and managing human-owned assets, the fields and the flocks. This is the point where the generic proto-dog lineage exploded into a diversity of forms, driven by the relentless, purposeful pressure of artificial selection imposed by early agricultural societies. The shocking truth here is the incredible speed of this transformation. Once a single wolf subspecies, the dog was rapidly sculpted into distinct phenotypes, body types, to serve specific, crucial economic roles. The birth of the guard dog, securing the harvest. When humans settled and amassed surplus grain and domesticated animals, they created something new in evolutionary terms: property. This property was a massive, concentrated, and highly attractive target for every desperate human tribe and large predator, wolves, bears, and leopards left in the wild. The defense of the Neolithic farm and village required a dog far more specialized than the old camp scavenger. The flock guardian. Early herders needed dogs that didn't just chase prey, but actively defended livestock without hunting them. This selected for a dog that was large, fearless, and possessed a low prey drive but a high territorial drive. The massive Kangal and Great Pyrenees breeds are living, historical relics of this original selection pressure. The property protector. To guard stores of grain and the village perimeter, humans selected for the largest, most intimidating dogs possible. This line gave rise to the ferocious mastiffs, the first truly gargantuan canids engineered by humans. Ancient DNA evidence suggests that the largest of these dogs developed massive jaws and increased bone density specifically to defend against large predators. They were the first examples of the dog being weaponized for defense. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing thousands of years later, would recount the immense value of these dogs, describing the king of Persia using vast armies of dogs bred purely for war and defense. In the ancient world, a giant, well-trained guard dog could be worth more than a slave or a prize horse. Sheep, genius, the cognitive leap. Perhaps the most astonishing feat of coevolution was the creation of the herding dog. To drive a flock of hundreds of skittish, semi-wild sheep or goats, the dog needed to execute highly complex, strategic maneuvers, flanking, driving, sorting, all based on silent hand signals, whistles, and the intensity of its eye contact, the stare. This behavior, known as herding, is a highly modified version of the wolf's predatory sequence, but crucially, the final, lethal step, the bite and kill, has been genetically disabled. Think of the wolf's hunting sequence: locate or orient, eye/stalk, chase/drive, grab/bite, kill/consume. The successful herding dog is the one whose brain interrupts the sequence between steps 3 and 4. It has the drive to control the movement of the flock, chase/drive, but lacks the instinct to attack. This is a profound, specific genetic modification performed by Neolithic farmers through thousands of years of culling any dog that tasted the livestock. The shocking truth about dog intelligence. Herding dogs are often cited as the pinnacle of canine intelligence, not because they're smarter than a wolf, but because their intelligence is uniquely compliant and controllable. Humans selected for the dog that could understand and execute abstract commands, making the dog a literal manager of valuable human capital, livestock. This level of deep abstract communication, dog managing animal for human, is unparalleled in interspecies relationships. The dog as a status symbol, from utility to luxury. As societies grew wealthy, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Indus Valley, the dog began its second major transformation from purely economic utility to symbolic capital and companionship. Ancient Egypt, c. 3100 BCE. The Egyptians were perhaps the first to truly integrate the dog into the cultural and religious fabric of society. The hunting hound. Breeds like the sleek, fast Saluki and Pharaoh hound, known for its erect ears and speed, were bred for royalty, used in high-status desert hunts for gazelle and hares. These dogs were often depicted in tomb paintings, draped in collars and leashes, symbolizing the owner's wealth and power. Grave goods and afterlife. The most profound demonstration of the dog's elevated status is its role in burial. Dogs were occasionally interred alongside their royal owners or given elaborate burials of their own, sometimes mummified and wrapped in linen. This ritualistic burial, usually reserved for elite humans, shows that the Egyptians believed the dog was valuable enough to merit passage into the afterlife. The god Anubis, the ultimate cultural elevation. The god of death, embalming, and the afterlife, Anubis was depicted as a jackal or a large dog, Canid. This placement at the gateway of the afterlife solidified the dog's role as protector, guide, and intermediary between the mortal and spiritual worlds. Mesopotamia, c. 4000 BCE. In the urban centers of Sumer and Akkad, the image of the dog was often one of brutal utility. Clay tablets detail the use of massive war dogs and aggressive guard dogs. However, they also reveal a growing acknowledgement of the dog as a healer. Healing symbolism. The goddess of healing, Gula, was frequently depicted accompanied by a dog. Dogs were seen as possessing therapeutic qualities, possibly due to their natural instinct to lick wounds, a habit which, while sometimes problematic, was thought to cleanse injuries. The association of the dog with healing is an early recognition of the emotional and physical comfort a dog provides, a precursor to modern therapy dogs. The first breed standards. By the time of the Roman Empire, c. 27 BCE, this artificial selection had been formalized. Writers and agriculturalists were recording the specific types of dogs needed for specific tasks. The writer Columella, in his agricultural treatise De Re Rustica, gave detailed instructions for selecting and caring for farm dogs. He specified two major types, showing the historical bifurcation of the dog. The watchdog, Canis Viliaticus, huge, black, or dark-colored, so as not to be confused with sheep, required to be fierce and fearless. The shepherd dog, Canis Pastoralis, white or light-colored, so as not to be confused with a wolf, required to be swift, intelligent, and less aggressive. This is the shocking blueprint. By the classical age, humans were not only breeding dogs for specialized jobs, they were consciously selecting for color and temperament to minimize tactical errors. The difference between a flock-killing dog and a wolf-slaying dog was a matter of color and size, meticulously controlled by human breeders. The dog was no longer just a partner. It was a carefully cataloged, purpose-built machine essential to the economy, warfare, religion, and emotional life of every major human civilization.
The sovereign and the scullery. The war dog of the Middle Ages. In the medieval period, the dog was not just a companion, it was a heavy weapon system. Across Europe and the Middle East, massive breeds like the Irish Wolfhound and the early Mastiff were bred to be terrifying participants in open warfare. The shocking truth of medieval combat is that dogs were often armored just like the knights they served. They wore leather and chainmail barding to protect them from sword strokes. Their role was psychological and physical, to break the line of enemy infantry by charging at the legs of horses and the throats of men. The spaniels of this era were also being refined, but for a different kind of war, the hunt. For a medieval lord, hunting was not a hobby, it was a rehearsal for battle. It required coordination, strategy, and a pack of dogs that could act as a single, cohesive unit. The lapdog, a biological status symbol. While the great hounds were patrolling the castle walls, a bizarre and fascinating evolution was happening inside the royal chambers. This is the birth of the toy breed, a concept that seems modern but is deeply rooted in historical power dynamics. In the royal courts of the Renaissance, from the Tudors in England to the Valois in France, small dogs like the Cavalier King Charles Spaniel and the Maltese became indispensable. The shocking truth of the sleeve dog, these tiny dogs served a purpose that was both intimate and practical. Lice magnets. In an era of poor hygiene and heavy velvet robes, humans were plagued by fleas and lice. It was widely believed, and somewhat true, that the higher body temperature of a small dog would attract the parasites away from the human and onto the dog. Hand warmers. In drafty stone palaces, these dogs were literally used as living heaters, tucked into sleeves or placed on laps to keep the nobility warm. The comfort gene. Humans began selecting for neoteny, the retention of juvenile features into adulthood. We wanted dogs with large eyes, flat faces, and high foreheads because these features trigger the same caretaking response in the human brain as a human infant. By breeding for cuteness, the aristocracy was performing a masterclass in genetic manipulation, creating a creature that existed purely for emotional regulation and social signaling. To own a dog that did nothing was the ultimate flex of wealth.
The scullery dog, the turnspit's tail. While the elites had their lapdogs, the working class in Britain and Europe engineered one of the most specialized and now extinct breeds in history, the turnspit dog, Canis vertigus. This is one of the darker chapters of our shared history. Before the invention of automated machinery, large roasts of meat had to be turned constantly over a fire for hours to cook evenly. To solve this, humans engineered a small, sturdy dog with crooked legs and high endurance. The dog was placed inside a wooden wheel connected to the spit. As the dog ran, like a hamster in a wheel, the meat turned. These dogs were the kitchen appliances of the 16th and 17th centuries. The shocking reality: turnspit dogs were often worked in pairs, taking shifts. It is said that when one dog saw the other being put in the wheel, it would hide, knowing the grueling labor ahead. This breed was so ubiquitous that it is mentioned by William Shakespeare and Charles Darwin. Once the mechanical clockwork spit was invented, the breed was no longer needed and was allowed to go extinct, a stark reminder that for much of history we viewed dogs as technology first and friends second. Part 5. The Enlightenment and the Birth of the Pet. The Scientific Classification. As the 18th century dawned, the Age of Reason brought a new way of looking at the dog. Carl Linnaeus, the father of modern taxonomy, classified the dog as Canis familiaris in 1758. For the first time, we weren't just looking at what a dog did, hunting, guarding, or turning a spit, but what a dog was biologically. This period saw the rise of the gentleman scientist and the sportsman. In the United States, figures like George Washington became obsessed with dog breeding. Washington's vision. Most Americans don't realize that the father of his country was also the father of the American foxhound. Washington wanted a dog that had the speed of the English hounds, but the bell-like voice and stamina required for the rugged Virginia terrain. He meticulously kept breeding logs, crossing his own hounds with French hounds gifted to him by the Marquis de Lafayette. The Victorian Revolution, the Kennel Club era. The final, most dramatic shift in the dog's evolution occurred in 19th century England. This is where the modern dog show was born. Before the mid-1800s, there were types of dogs, but not breeds in the strict sense we know today. If a dog herded sheep, it was a shepherd dog, regardless of what it looked like. The Victorians, obsessed with order, categorization, and purity, changed everything. The eugenics of canines. They began closing stud books. This meant that for a dog to be a purebred, both its parents had to be registered. This created a genetic bottleneck. Aesthetics over function. Instead of breeding for the best hunter or the best guard, people began breeding for the standard, a specific look. This is when the bulldog, once a lean, athletic bull baiter, was bred into the heavy-set, flat-faced companion we see today. This era transformed the dog into a hobby. The middle class, burgeoning during the Industrial Revolution, could now afford to keep a dog purely for the fancy. This is the point where the dog's evolution moved from the forest and the farm into the living room and the show ring.
The Great Pedigree Explosion. The Victorian Obsession, Creating the Modern Dog, 1800s. The 19th century was defined by the Industrial Revolution, global empire, and the rigid application of scientific principles to every facet of life, including nature. This era marked the final, decisive separation of the dog from its wild ancestry and the beginning of its life as a standardized consumer product. The most shocking truth of this era is that most of the dog breeds recognized today, from the Chihuahua to the Great Dane, are not ancient evolutionary lineages, but highly stylized Victorian inventions. Darwin, pigeons, and the canine blueprint. This period began with a scientific catalyst, Charles Darwin. When formulating his theory of natural selection, Darwin was deeply influenced by the meticulous artificial selection performed by English pigeon fanciers. He saw in their deliberate, rapid creation of diverse pigeon forms a perfect analogy for how nature sculpted species over millennia. The dog as evidence. Darwin, in The Variation of Animals and Plants Under Domestication, 1868, dedicated extensive chapters to the dog. He marveled at the immense variation, the tiny, short-legged dachshund bred to hunt badgers in tunnels, and the enormous, long-legged Irish wolfhound bred to hunt wolves. This variation became a cornerstone of his argument that all dogs shared a single common ancestor, the wolf. His research, however, inadvertently fueled a new, powerful movement, the breed fancy. If humans could create such magnificent diversity, they should catalog, standardize, and perfect it. The birth of the Kennel Club, standardizing nature. Before the 1870s, dogs were often known by their regional jobs, a sheepdog from Scotland, a terrier that worked the earth. They were crossbred to maintain working ability. The show ring. The rise of dog shows, modeled after livestock exhibitions, fundamentally changed this. The first formal dog show was held in England in 1859. The Kennel Club, established in 1873, began maintaining stud books and creating breed standards. The new selection pressure. The criteria for a good dog shifted dramatically. It was no longer about efficiency in the field, but about conformity to an aesthetic ideal dictated by a written standard. breeders selected aggressively for traits that might be utterly useless in the wild or on the farm: an extremely flat face, a dramatically domed skull, an exaggeratedly long back, or a specific, unblemished coat color. The shocking consequence: genetic bottlenecks. To achieve these aesthetic standards, breeders relied heavily on inbreeding, mating close relatives to set desired traits quickly. While successful in creating distinct, predictable breeds, this hyper-selection came at a terrible cost. Reduced genetic diversity. Each breed became a small, isolated gene pool, making them susceptible to specific heritable diseases. The Labrador Retriever became prone to hip dysplasia, the Boxer to heart issues, and the German Shepherd to spinal issues. This direct human-imposed evolutionary flaw resulted in brachiocephalic obstructive airway syndrome, BOAS, making breathing difficult, especially in heat. The Victorian era, in its pursuit of perfection, invented the concept of the purebred, and in doing so, created a host of genetic vulnerabilities that the dog still struggles with today. The Americanization of the dog, 1900s present. As the United States rapidly industrialized and urbanized in the 20th century, the role of the dog shifted yet again. The American dog was increasingly detached from its working origins and firmly installed as a member of the nuclear family, primarily fulfilling an emotional rather than economic function. The AKB and the American Standard. The AKB, founded in 1884, became the guardian of the breed standard in the U.S. Their influence solidified the prestige of the purebred. The suburban companion. The rise of the suburbs after World War II cemented the dog's status. The family dog, a golden retriever, a beagle, or a collie, became a quintessential symbol of the American middle-class ideal: loyalty, innocence, and domestic stability. The emotional anchor. In a mobile, rapidly changing industrial society, the dog represented consistency and unconditional love. It served as a safe, non-judgmental confidant for children and an emotional anchor for adults, reinforcing the ancient oxytocin loop discovered millennia ago. The digital age and the designer dog. The 21st century brought a new wave of artificial selection, fueled by celebrity culture and social media. The doodle phenomenon. The rise of designer dogs, particularly the poodle crosses, Labradoodle, Golden Doodle, highlights the modern rejection of the Victorian aesthetic extremes and a return to prioritizing functional traits, specifically hypoallergenic coats and balanced temperaments. The market essentially created a new breed overnight, attempting to breed out the problems caused by Victorian inbreeding while retaining the companionable nature. The genetic renaissance. Ironically, the same technology that uncovered the dog's true wolf ancestry is now being used to address the genetic damage imposed by 2 centuries of aesthetic selection. The enduring truth. The ultimate success story. The 40,000-year historical reality of the dog's evolution reveals a shocking truth that speaks directly to the human condition. We did not dominate the dog, we co-created each other. The dogs that followed our camps were simply the most adaptable wolves. The humans that embraced them were the most successful hunters and ultimately the most successful colonizers of the planet. The dog is the only animal that can read human social cues, our pointing, our gaze, our emotional states, as well or better than a human child. This cognitive synchronization is the legacy of the survival bargain. The dog is a mirror, reflecting our needs across history. 40,000 years ago, they reflected our need for survival, scavenging, and hunting. 10,000 years ago, they reflected our need for security and economy, guarding and herding. 100 years ago, they reflected our need for status and beauty, pedigree and show. Today, they reflect our profound need for unconditional love and emotional stability. The dog is not the best hunter, guard, or tracker anymore. But today, the most essential job the dog performs is the most valuable. It keeps us human. Our eyes meet, the ancient oxytocin loop fires, and in that silent biological connection, we are reminded that our species' greatest achievement was not the invention of the wheel or fire, but the successful, enduring partnership with the ghost in the DNA. The story of the dog's evolution is, in fact, the untold story of human evolution.